number one before his own self-political interest. Happy to take some questions.
Ms. Wooldridge, first to you. Has the rise of working from home over the last few years had an impact on closing the gender pay gap? And if that was to be wound back, do you think there would be any change on progress?
So workplace flexibility is an important enabler for particularly women, but anyone who has parental and caring responsibilities to be able to balance those competing responsibilities between working and their caring responsibilities that they have. So we're very supportive of them. Flexible working arrangements are quite broad. It includes working from home, but it also can include job share, variable shift hours, being able to choose your shifts, and a whole range of other measures. But there is no doubt that enhanced flexible working arrangements enhances access to participation in the workforce and to working at the highest possible level to contribute both to the workplace and the economy as a whole.
Minister, taking in the CEO pays in this data, the pay gap did slightly increase. That's despite wages rising in the care sector and your government's PPL reforms. What more can be done, and can we expect to see any measures that will form part of Labor's re-election campaign?
Well, obviously we will have more to say about women and supporting women and driving equality across the country as we work through the next few months. But we've made this a central focus for us, and it hasn't just been in pay, although that's an important area, and making sure women are getting recognised through their pay packets for the work they do, and it's been undervalued and under-recognised for too long, but in a whole range of other areas, whether it's be women's safety, housing, educational opportunities, you know, you name it, we're in that space looking for ways to shift the dial and make sure women get the fair treatment and equality that they deserve. We know that that's not the case, hasn't been the case, but we've seen significant improvements and we want to keep that moving forward. I think the biggest risk to that is the opposition. I mean, they've now said working from home's, you know, going to be cancelled. They're also saying they won't support the next reforms for the WGEA review. These were common sense, you know, recommendations to just allow target setting to continue to shift the dial in individual workplaces. They've now said they oppose that. You know, they don't have women's interests at heart. They don't see it as a central economic driver of growth in our economy. We do, and we want to keep pushing that change. On the working from home, can I just say on this, clearly the opposition have no idea about how modern working families operate. Working from home arrangements are a part of private and public sector workplaces in the modern age. And, you know, I think when you look at the announcements they've made today, apart from opposing sensible continued reforms in WGEA, they've announced they're going to cut services, build $600 billion worth of nuclear power stations, and other ideas are being copied from the United States. I mean, that's the world we're in right now. And I think women have a right to feel at risk in terms of the agenda that we've been putting in place and the one that we want to move driving forward. Go over here and then I'll come back. I'll make sure my answers are a bit shorter.
Minister, and I guess for Ms Wooldridge as well, you were pointing out how this is obviously different to same job, same pay, which has been the law for a very long time. But there's a little bit of distortion, definitely sort of in the public's discourse about it, with people pointing out, well, the gender pay gap is closed because it's illegal to pay people a different wage for the same job. Do you think that there's a legitimate misunderstanding in the community of what the gender pay gap actually is, or do you think there's some bad faith distortion going on?
I think most women understand the gender pay gap pretty well because it's something that's existed for most women through their working life. But yeah, I mean, it's up to us to explain again what factors contribute to the gender pay gap. So it's about, you know, women's representation in the organisation, how many women you have working, where they're working, what sort of arrangements are under, whether it be bonuses and other kind of arrangements that get done between the employer. All those factor in to the gender pay gap. But I think most women understand it, even if they don't understand all the technical aspects. It means, you know, they are often dudded in terms of income, and I think there's an expectation that government does what it can to make sure that that gap is closing. I don't know if you had to add, Mary.
Also say that we see the discourse has actually shifted even over the last 12 months with publishing of employer gender pay gaps, and at WGEA we've worked very hard to educate people, but the media conversation has definitely progressed, and we're very much focusing this time on, well, what are we doing about it? And you say you've got more men at high paying positions. Yes, that's the driver of the gender pay gap. So what are you doing about it? And the conversation is progressing. I think there's clearly some people who choose not to accept that definition, but they're clearly quite distinct, and they're measuring two different things. So we'll continue to educate employers and the broader community about the differences, but there clearly is a gender pay gap, and the way that it's measured is very clear, and that's what we need to close. So we need to drive those compositional and pay differences.
Hello.
SEN Hume gave the example of a public servant who was working full-time from home but who was travelling around Australia in their camper van and was often uncontactable. Do you have any concerns that there are people in the public service misusing working from home arrangements?
Yes, I did notice that there was an anecdotal description of someone who'd called the office to say this was happening to someone they knew. So I would say to Senator Hume, if there is evidence of that particular scenario, she should be at least providing it to me, because there are arrangements in place that would ensure that that behaviour is not acceptable. And those, you know, have existed under governments of all persuasions. But it wasn't, it was, let's just say that particular cameo was pretty light on detail. There is a few, you know, someone rings an office and says something, therefore it's a fact. I have asked, because these arrangements under the enterprise agreement have been, you know, they've been in operation for about a year now. I've asked the Public Service Commissioner about a month ago, or it might have been slightly longer, to give me a report on how it's working and across what agencies. I'm now the Government Services Minister, for example, and I've spent a bit of time in Queensland visiting Services Australia outlets, big call centres, places like that. And I've been told by supervisors if they weren't able to provide flexible working arrangements or working from home arrangements for some of the time for their employees, they wouldn't have been able to recruit to positions, because it is, you know, a competitive market for labour, and those working from home arrangements are pretty standard across the economy now. So I've asked for that report, and that will give us an insight into, you know, where it's working well, how employees are feeling, how managers are feeling about it, and I think it's routine that we do that as part of the enterprise bargaining arrangement.
Minister, you mentioned policies copied from the US.
Yeah.
We've also seen a pushback against equality policies in the US, particularly under the new administration. Are you worried that pushback against DEI could spread to Australia, or has already spread to Australia?
Well, we're certainly seeing that from the opposition, I would say. I think they're seeing that in a very political frame, as opposed to, you know, doing, you know, making decisions based on good policy in the interests of people in the country. You know, we are supportive of a diverse workplace. We think the public service should lead in some of these areas. We think our services are better when they are delivered by a community that represents the community they are there to serve. And that means you have people who have a disability, you have people from non-English speaking backgrounds, you have First Nations Australians. We know, and again, I'm seeing it firsthand now as I travel around Services Australia, because they have such a large footprint, they're in virtually every community, how important it is to have people who reflect the community they're there to serve. We strongly support that. We don't think we need some of those political directions imported from the US into Australia. We'll always stand up for what the right thing to do is, and I think we've been proud of the record that the public service particularly, which is the area we have responsibility, has shown in recent times. I'd also say the working from home, I saw Peter Dutton's press conference where he said this is all about public servants in Canberra, so yeah, always has a good old kick at the national capital. That's almost expected from him. But the reality is 2/3 of the public service live outside the ACT. Many of them would have some sort of working from home arrangements in place, and it allows us, and I have spoken to secretaries, departmental heads, to employ people from regional and rural parts of Australia to work for the Australian government, again, representing the communities they serve. So this idea that, this tough act that you direct everyone to get back to work in Canberra is absolute rubbish. This is something that works across the country, and it allows people to join a public service where that opportunity might not have existed for them before. Sorry, Dan.
Slightly different topic. The Economic Inclusion Committee that advises the government on the adequacy of job seeker and underpayments, there's a legislative requirement that report or the advice is released 14 days prior to a budget. That will fall on March 11, early next week. Will that report be released on or before early next week?
Well, the legislation will be followed. This is a matter that falls under Minister Rishworth and the Treasurer's portfolio, but I think the legislation is clear around timeframes.
Minister, is there any appetite from government to expand the number of the businesses captured via the gender pay gap reporting? Because I think it's captured above 100 employees for each business. Is there any appetite to go lower than that? And Ms Wooldridge, is there any deficiencies in the data that you see, given that those businesses with less than 100 employees aren't captured by the data?
So I'll answer first on whether we would go below 100. That isn't something that we're contemplating at the moment. We think the next stage of logical reforms is to focus on big employers and setting of targets and how they intend to reach those targets. They're the ones that Peter Dutton is stopping in the Senate. So just to give you a little taste of what a Peter Dutton government might do, we're seeing that. He's opposed to that sensible reform, but we're not looking at lowering the level of employees covered.
And the review of the Workplace Gender Equality Act canvassed this exact question. We're very supportive that it stays at 100 or more employees. We understand that there is a burden with reporting, and it takes time and effort. It's absolutely important and fundamental, but that it's pitched at the right level for employers with 100 or more employees to be able to capture that data. And it means we do have 5.3 million employees covered by our data set, which is a very comprehensive part of our economy, and we're able to then work with them in terms of driving the change. And just in context, so for 500 or more, where additional requirements apply, we actually capture 25% of employers, but 75% of employees. So we do capture so many employees by particularly focusing on those large businesses for additional change.
Minister, just on work from home again, figures show that almost double the number of public servants working. There's almost double the numbers of public servants working from home compared to the private sector, 61% compared with 36%. So what do you think that disparity shows? Does that show that there are too many public servants with working from home arrangements, or that the private sector should catch up? And if I may, on a completely different subject, the UK has decided to open up frozen Russian assets to provide more defence support for Ukraine, to free up those frozen assets. Is that something that the Australian government is also considering, or has been asked to do so?
Okay, so perhaps if I start on that one, I don't have anything further to add other than the Prime Minister's made it very clear that we support President Zelensky and Ukraine. We've been a big supporter to provide resources to them to allow them to defend their country, and obviously we keep matters about further support under active consideration at all times, but I don't have anything further to add in relation to your specific question. In terms of the working from home arrangements, I would imagine some of that reflects the makeup of those jobs, so what jobs people are in the private sector, as to the disparity, and the fact that I think in the public sector in particular, we are trying to ensure that there are flexible working arrangements as a way of ensuring that we can attract and retain people in employment in the public service. For what we don't have on pay, the public service often has to compete on conditions of employment. So I would think, and Mary might have some more information on this than me, but the nature of the work performed by the private sector would contribute to that, i.e. you have to be present in your role in your workplace, whether it's in construction or retail, for example. But I have asked, because the nature of work is changing across the economy, I have asked for the Public Service Commissioner to complete that report, because I do think it's incumbent on employers to make sure that where those arrangements exist, that they are working both for the institution as well as the employees. The feedback I get, and this isn't Canberra-based as much as Mr Dutton would like it to be, the feedback I get from managers and from individual employees is positive. It allows them to balance their other responsibilities and still perform their work. But I think we need to stay across it and make sure that it's working for everybody. I'd also like to just clarify, I think Senator Hume saying that employees have a right to demand these arrangements. That is not correct. The enterprise agreement allows an employee to request ability to work from home. It is still on the employer whether or not they agree to that, and it has to meet operational requirements of the workplace. So this idea that you can just rock up to your boss and say, this is what I'm going to do, is simply not correct. So I just wanted to correct that too.
One thing I might add, and roughly, the order of magnitude is about half of all jobs do require that face-to-face presence, and nursing or healthcare, social assistance is another good example. Big industry, lots of people requires that face-to-face. So in the private sector, at roughly half of all jobs don't have an option, which is why other sorts of flexibility are important to factor into that as well.
On the provisions within the EBA specifically, Senator Hume has said that they want to do this proposal within existing frameworks. Does the EBA, as it stands currently, allow for that proposal to occur?
Well, it's unclear what the opposition are saying. If you listen to Senator Hume, it's people are going to be frog marched back into the office day one. Her leader was slightly less forceful in the language he used this morning, but the EBA is clear. Employees have a right to request working from home arrangements, and employers have the right to approve or not approve that. Now, if Senator Hume is saying that she's going to override the EBA or direct every secretary in the department not to allow working from home arrangements, that's a matter for her to explain how that happens. Ministers don't employ people in the public service. That's covered by the enterprise agreement, but I'll leave it to them to explain their latest import from the US. We believe the EBA sets out a fair way of regulating those arrangements, and also it'll be interesting to see this report I get from the APSC Commissioner about exactly how it is operating in those big frontline service agencies I'm particularly interested in around the country.
Just back to the gender pay gap, we've gotten a report today from the Regional Australia Institute that shows that a lot of jobs actually you can keep more of what you earn if you move to the regions. However, in the report it shows that that really only applies to men, and in fact if women do the same job in the regions they actually earn less. Is this an issue that you're aware of? Is this regional city divide something that is perhaps a bit bigger than what we're realising in the data today?
So it's a great question, and it is something that we've had a very small amount of data historically, but We now do have information about location of employee, which will enable us to do more of the analysis, which will be to come now that we've been able to publish gender pay gaps today. But there is a penalty for working in beyond the metropolitan boundaries in terms of the earnings of both men and women, and a gender pay gap that's driven as well. So I'll look forward to having a look at the detail of that report, and we will be in a position to be able to publish more information based on the WGEA data set.
Okay, I think we've got a couple more.
You've both been long-term advocates in this area, both at state and federal levels of parliaments. Both worked in different sides of the political aisle. Do you have any reflections on why your male colleagues have not been as vocal in this area over the course of a period at which you've both been very vocal?
Well, I mean, I can speak for my side. I think certainly working with the PM, I think he's been pretty vocal about this. He talks about the gender pay gap often. He was very clear when he appointed me to this role that it was to drive women's economic equality through the centre of government, and that's why he put the two portfolios together. I think in our organisation also it helps when you've got the first majority women government in Australia's history, which is hard to believe that it's 2025, but that's the case. And I think all of my male colleagues, I often say there's no argument about whether we push for equality in our party room. It's front and centre, it's accepted, and it's really how you get there. And we have the support of all of the men in the room on that. But I'll let you speak, Mary, about your experience.
You won't be surprised for me to say that as a public servant, I actually don't comment on political parties or political policy. I have some long-standing points on the record in relation to how things can change from my previous part of my career, but I'll leave it at
Very diplomatic, Mary, very diplomatic. I'll go here and then I think, all right, one more and then we're done.
Minister, the ABS just reported that the current accounts deficit in 2024 blew up to $52.4 billion, which is the largest since 2016. Is the government planning to pay for increased government spending with Brad Creek? Is that an intentional plan of the government?
Thank you. Well, you'll see all of the decisions the government's made through our budget, and I would say that it'll continue the path that we have outlined in our previous three budgets, which is we find a range of ways to ensure that we are able to invest and prioritise those cost of living assistance, but other important investments in health and aged care and education today. A big announcement is a mix of savings, reprioritisation, paying down debt as one of the areas where it's one of the fastest growing areas across the government's budget. You'll see more of that. We did deliver a tax cut to every taxpayer, including those who were earning under $45,000 that weren't going to get a tax cut. And, we lifted the thresholds and the tax rates for a couple of brackets. And, we think when you look at all of that, that's been a good way of returning money to individuals through the tax system. And we'll have more to say on that as we progress through the next little while.
Mr. Gallagher, I just had a quick question on a different topic, just about the Port of Darwin.
Right.
There's a meeting obviously this week, Thursday, with the Northern Territory Government. Is there plans from the federal government to potentially look into purchasing the Port of Darwin or breaking that lease?
Well, I think we've been clear about some of the concerns we've had on that, and I note Senator Patterson out today seemingly blaming us for something that happened under the former government where they didn't raise any objections to that sale. There's meetings to be had, and at the conclusion of those, more information will be available.
Just on the bill that's currently before Parliament,
Yep.
when that went to a review in the Senate, it recommended stricter requirements around procurement and meeting those targets. Are you interested in introducing amendments to affect that recommendation?
Well, we are looking at procurement as a way of, again, using every lever available to government to ensure that we are shifting the dial for women, and so we are looking at how we can record or, basically understand a little bit more about how much procurement through government goes to women or women-owned businesses, and so we are looking at that, but that's not part of that bill, and that bill is seemingly not getting through the Senate at the moment. So we've got a bit of work to do there. I again, if Peter Dutton cares about women and work and equality, then I would say that today he should say that he supports that bill and go back to the position he's had for the last few years. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming in. Thanks for your coverage as well.
Thank you.